Right. Let's just jump straight into this explainer with a pretty staggering number from the year 1514. Back then, international politics was, well, a literal cutthroat business. 1500. Just take a second to think about what a number like that might represent when we talk about global power. Give up? That number was the annual salary in ducats offered by the Republic of Venice to anyone, and I mean absolutely anyone, who could successfully poison a rival king. Seriously, according to official records, the Venetian government had an actual on-the-books budget for assassinating rival leaders. They were fielding offers to poison emperors, kings, sultans, the whole shebang. It perfectly illustrates the completely ruthless, unrestrained baseline of global power struggles that we're exploring today. In a world where power reigns supreme, the weak are entirely at the mercy of the strong. Might literally makes right. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking Hans Morgenthau's foundational text to understand exactly why restraining power on the global stage is just so uniquely difficult. We're going to look at the fascinating and honestly often terrifying history of how we human beings have tried to put rules on warfare, and how those rules have dramatically succeeded and, well, catastrophically failed. Here is our roadmap for today. First up, restraining the power struggle. Second, ethics, mores, and law. Third, protecting human life. Fourth, the aristocratic moral code. Fifth, the rise of nationalism. And finally, competing universal ethics. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Restraining the power struggle, limiting the drive for power. To protect the weak from the strong, society essentially relies on three distinct types of rules, and each carries a totally different kind of punishment if you break it. First up, we've got ethics. If you break an ethical rule, the punishment is internal, right? You feel those pangs of conscience or remorse. Second, we have mores. Now, if you violate mores, unorganized society reacts with spontaneous disapproval. Think boycotting your business or social ostracism. And finally, law. Break the law, and organized society steps in with police action, trials, and formal punishment. Now notice the sharp contrast here, because it's absolutely crucial. While domestic law is surrounded by this formidable triple wall of enforcement, the international scene, it's more like a wild frontier where power just dictates right. At home, you have the police, but on the global stage, there's no supreme 911 to call when a nation misbehaves. Section 2. Ethics, mores, and law. The triple wall of defense. As Morgenthau points out, when your property or life is threatened domestically, society marshals all three types of sanctions. A would-be killer faces his conscience, social ruin, and the police. They reinforce each other. It's a tight safety net. But internationally, those nets just completely disappear. Without a global police force, we are forced to rely heavily on international ethics and world public opinion, which, as history clearly shows us, is a highly, highly precarious safety net. Section 3. Protecting human life, the shifting rules of war. This shift brilliantly illustrates a pretty terrifying curve. We actually moved from ancient massacres to a rather civilized 18th century limited war, only to regress right back into the catastrophic total wars of the modern era. In antiquity, war was a free-for-all contest between all inhabitants. You could kill or enslave anyone. But by the 18th century, a profound moral shift happened. War became a contest strictly between armies, and it was considered a moral and legal duty to just leave civilians alone. Yet, shockingly, the 20th century saw us revert to targeting entire populations. So what happened? How did we lose that moral high ground? Section 4. The aristocratic moral code. A gentleman's club. To understand that 18th century restraint, we have to look at something called the aristocratic international. Back then, the world wasn't run by passionate nationalists. It was run by a really small, cohesive group of aristocratic rulers. I mean, they shared family ties across borders, they literally all spoke French, and they held unified moral convictions about what a gentleman could and could not do. These aristocratic rulers were actually more loyal to their shared supranational class and their gentlemanly honor than to the specific nations they were actually governing. There are some incredible historical anecdotes that really bring this to life. Take Otto von Bismarck, a Prussian diplomat. He was casually asked by the Russian Tsar if he wanted to enter the Russian diplomatic service. Bismarck declined, but he did so politely, and there was absolutely zero moral outrage about the offer. It proves that changing allegiances was, well, just business. It wasn't treason. Imagine an American president today offering a cabinet position to a rival nation's top diplomat. There's no way. It would be a massive scandal. But back then, they were all just part of the same cosmopolitan society. Statecraft was openly commercialized. Ambassadors were frequently bribed with thousands of francs or, diamond snuff boxes, and governments openly paid foreign statesmen for favorable treaties. And because the diplomats were essentially playing a high-stakes game for personal gain and prestige, rather than fighting for deeply held ideological crusades, conflicts were kept confined to predictable, narrow limits. The simple desire for a profitable deal totally blunted the edge of international controversies. Section 5. The Rise of Nationalism, the Tragic Twist. So as the 19th century progressed, democratic selection replaced government by aristocracy. Suddenly, officials became accountable to parliaments and the masses, rather than that cozy, cosmopolitan club of monarchs. Foreign ministers were no longer princes. They were former generals, college professors, union leaders. And when officials became accountable to a specific, localized public, that shared, universal morality of the aristocratic world just completely collapsed. They no longer answered to a supranational code of honor. They answered to their voters. And that created a terrifying new standard. Universal ethics were replaced by fragmented nationalistic loyalties. The new ultimate moral standard became, right or wrong, my country. A diplomat's only moral obligation was now to further their own nation's power and ideals, basically at any cost. There was no longer a shared moral framework above the nation-state to rein them in. Section 6. Competing universal ethics, the era of total war. Let's look at this chilling number. It represents a profound shift in how nations viewed their enemies in the 20th century. 20 million. That brutal statement, made by French leader Georges Clemenceau, reveals the terrifying new reality. In the era of competing nationalisms, nations didn't just want to defeat an enemy's army on the battlefield anymore. They wanted to erase their existence based on deeply entrenched nationalistic ideologies. Wars reverted to religious-style conflicts. Citizens weren't fighting for a prince's glory. They were fighting for a way of life, demanding unconditional surrender and the total destruction of those who held a different view of the world. And this ideological hatred was perfectly and honestly disastrously paired with the Industrial Revolution. Because modern armies rely entirely on the total industrial output of the civilian population, suddenly the factory worker, the railroad engineer, and the farmer all became valid military targets. Modern technology, from bomber planes to blockades, provided the actual means to strike at these civilians directly. That careful moral progress of the 18th century, that strict line between soldier and non-combatant, was just wiped out entirely. Which leads us to the terrifying modern paradox. The moral compulsion of the modern nation-state is so overwhelmingly powerful that it can demand its citizens commit acts of unimaginable mass destruction. I mean, think about it. A state can ask an individual to drop a single atomic bomb, instantly destroying hundreds of thousands of lives. The loyalty to the nation completely overrides any whisper of universal human ethics that say thou shalt not kill. We want to leave you with this final, vital question to ponder. In a world where ethical systems are fundamentally tied to national borders, where every country claims its own values are the universal truth, is global peace inherently impossible? As long as we are divided by these rigid national loyalties, can we ever reconstruct that shared universal restraint on power? It's a profound challenge that Hans Morgenthau leaves right at our feet, and one that remains incredibly urgent today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, think deeply about the invisible rules that govern our world.